Former U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft is here to weigh in on this. And, Senator, I was thinking of you because in your day, that was a very controversial approval process. You barely beat the filibuster minimum of 41 when you got approved by 58 to 42 in a very divided, raucous Senate that was making you sort of like the point person for every element in society. I don't know whether Senator Sessions is being fingered for the same, but how do you think it's going thus far?
Well, it's going very well. Really, some of the questions have really allowed Senator Sessions to reinforce his main virtue in becoming Attorney General, and that is that he's devoted to the rule of law. When they seem to improperly conflate or confuse his positions in the Senate, some of which would be in agreement with what law was passed and disagreement, they mistake the issue. He is a person devoted to, once a law is passed, to having that law enforced.
Was that your position too, Senator, when you were going through the confirmation process for the same time?
It was not only my position, it was my policy in the Justice Department. We don't need people in the Attorney General's office who would somehow subordinate the rule of law to their own personal preferences. And unfortunately, that's happened more recently than we would like for it to have happened, where people said, well, I don't agree with that law, we won't enforce it. We think that the law would be better off in another configuration, so we'll adjust the law. No, the law should be made by the United States Congress, signed by the President, and once it's the law, it needs to be enforced. It was my responsibility to do that with laws I both agreed with and disagreed with, and I took that responsibility seriously, and I am convinced that these hearings are allowing Jeff Sessions to reveal that that would be his approach, which is the appropriate approach. So when they ask the tough questions now, I feel like it's like the old Paul Harvey radio script. They ask him tough questions and the drive-by political assassination types, and then he gives the answer, and the answer is the rest of the story, and the rest of the story is not only clarification, but the rest of the story indicates that he's a person dedicated to the Constitution and the rule of law, which safeguards liberties for all Americans.
Now, I'm not sure, Senator, whether they looked at your confirmation hearings, because they were raucous at the time. I can remember covering them. You ended up, though, with all of that hullabaloo, getting 8 Democratic votes to join the 50 Republicans in the Senate. This is expected to go largely along party lines. I don't know if that's true, which would mean that Jeff Sessions would squeak by. Some of the other cabinet picks, Secretary of State position, and Mr. Tillerson's case, anyone's guess, because there were already a couple of Republicans kind of raising doubts about him. But how do you think this goes?
Well, first of all, I expect Jeff Sessions to be confirmed, and I think most of the votes have already been decided in personal meetings and the like. A good bit of these hearings is theater, and there will be some theater of people seeking to become the people who are best regarded by the Democrat Party as eligible to become leaders in a party that's now adrift. So
but would it go along party lines? I mean, yours did not. You were able to get some bipartisan backing, which was unusual in the environment at the time. But I don't know. I mean, I've told the people who count heads and numbers and say that it will probably be, when all is said and done, a 52-48 vote, that close given the makeup of the Senate. What do you think?
Well, I would think that would be unlikely. There are 8 or 10 senators who are up for election next year who are on the Democrat side, who were in jurisdictions that Trump carried by double digits. You would think that their ability just to advertise themselves as total partisans and people who would disregard the virtue of this proposed nominee in order just to sort of sync themselves up with a party that was held in disregard by their state.
Joe Manchin of West Virginia comes to mind, and some more moderate or more vulnerable Democrats. That's a very good point. I guess what I would ask you, though, is the job itself. This is the kickoff one. Of course, we're going to get the Homeland Security position a little later today, and, of course, 5 are up for confirmation hearings tomorrow. But this one gets a lot of attention because the Attorney General is a very powerful post. And even though you respect the law and you're supposed to uphold the law, whether, as you pointed out, sir, you agree with it or not, some zealous attorneys general can go beyond that and interpret the law. That was a rap against Eric Holder. Many said the same to you post 9/11. How do you define the job?
Well, the job is the job of safeguarding American liberties by limiting the governmental authority to that which is expressed in the law and Constitution. I think when people conflate the idea of power with the idea of authority, the Constitution tells you what the authority is, and it's supposed to limit the exercise of power. I think more recently we saw a president who, rather intoxicated with his power, disregarded the Constitution and the role of the legislative branch, and literally by fiat or by executive order was creating things that rightfully belonged in the process of law creation in the legislature. I think the clear value of Jeff Sessions is that he is devoted to the restoration of the rule of law, limiting the exercise of power in conformity with the authority provided in the statutes and the Constitution. And yes, there are people who have abused their power by exceeding the authority of the Constitution. Jeff Sessions is a person whose life has been devoted to observing, respecting both the law and the Constitution. And I think his hearings are going to make this abundantly clear, and I expect him to be confirmed. And I expect him to be an excellent Attorney General because of his devotion to the rule of law, which has not been respected in recent days.
Senator General, you have an impressive resume, so I'll just use both. Let me get your take on this theater aspect you mentioned, and I agree with you, but to me it looks like professional wrestling, that everyone has their positions, and then they go back to their respective corners after the hearing. And I wonder in your case, if you don't want to, compromise friendships and all, where they say, look, I have to really, go after you, John, but I still love you, but I've got a lot of people who are expecting me to rip you a new one. And then you hug afterwards. I think it's professional wrestling. What say you?
Well, obviously there's an element of that. I don't mean to say that there are totally insincere people opposed. There may be very sincere opposition. But there were people who said to me, I'll be with you, but, and then they weren't, and then later on came to me and said, well, we saw you were going to win, so I could take a pass on this, and my people wanted me to be againch you.
That's a little wormy. So, that strikes me as very wormy.
Well, let me just say, this is politics.
Yeah, you're right.
And there are people who are seeking to establish themselves as the banner bearers for the Democrat Party, which doesn't know exactly where it's going.
Do you think that banner bearer could be Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey tomorrow? He's going to be testifying against Senator Sessions.
Well, I find that to be a very, very aggressive tactic, and it's also a risky tactic. When you put yourself on the interrogation side of the table, it's one thing, but when you make yourself available to be interrogated, if you're a witness before a Senate committee, there are members of the Senate, if they choose to, who can ask you questions. And I think a person who's going to go to that side of the desk and start throwing rocks better be sure he doesn't live in a glass house.
Well put. Senator, General, thank you for your service for this country at a very, very scary time as well. Good seeing you. Happy New Year.
Yeah, my best to you. Thanks a lot.